Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to come to Sofia. I am not going to introduce the participants because you have the programs. I'm sure most of you know them anyway, and if not, rest assured they're all great and you will probably hear this. It's Dubravka, Stojanović, it's Iryna, Vidanava, Vessela, Tcherneva, and Stanislav, Secrieru. I'm very happy that we can discuss the issue of the European Union. However, I would like to make a suggestion that we slightly alter the question. And it's too late now, we're on the stage, so we can do whatever we like. And I will tell you why. The question we are talking about is, why would anyone want to join the European Union? I would suggest, I mean, we can talk about that as well, but why don't we talk also about the question, why would anyone who wants to join the European Union think that it's possible at all? And as a short introduction, I will tell you why I think this is an important issue. You all know 2004, we had the Big Bang, the big enlargement of the European Union with 10 new members. And when you look back at those times, the membership talks were rather fast. Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovakia took 34 months to negotiate from start to the end until they could join. Estonia, Poland, and Slovenia took 56 months, which is still, not much. The European Union membership talks of the country we are in, Bulgaria, took 58 months. The record holder so far is Croatia. In Croatia, it lasted 68 months, so 5.5 years roughly, from the beginning of the talks to their completion. If we keep up this pace, if Northern Macedonia started negotiating today at the pace of Poland, for example, it could join in the summer of 2027, which is, I would say, fair enough. But this is not how things are going anymore. And the only reason I need this paper is because I don't know the figures that I will quote you now by heart, otherwise I wouldn't have to look in the paper. Serbia is in negotiations for 110 months. This is 9 years. Montenegro is in negotiations in 129 months, almost 11 years. Now you would say, okay, well, that's a very long time, but probably they're about to complete the negotiations, no? Well, not quite. Serbia so far has closed 2 of 35 chapters in 9 years. Montenegro is further ahead. They managed to provisionally close 3 chapters in 11 years. So in average, it took Montenegro more than 3.5 years to close 1 negotiation chapter. Or, I did a little math here, closing 1 single chapter took Montenegro 8 months more than the entire negotiation process for Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovakia. If the Commission continues negotiating with Montenegro, for example, at the current pace, then Montenegro would need to close the other 30 chapters, roughly 1,270 months, or 105 years, which means it could join the European Union in July 2127. I leave it open to you whether first or second half of July. That's probably up for negotiations. Now some say, I have given this speech twice. Actually, I saw some people in the audience who were here when I gave the same lecture in December. Sorry for being boring, but nothing has changed, so I have to repeat the same I said in December. It's not me who doesn't move. So some say, yeah, but this was before the war in Ukraine. This is a watershed. Everything has changed. I would dare to challenge this view because, first of all, in this year, nothing has happened with the existing candidates. We have more candidates. We'll be talking about that, of course. But still, pace-wise, nothing has happened. And there is one more thing that I think we have to keep in mind. We know now that we should have listened before what Putin said. Listen to crazy politicians, but also listen to democratically elected politicians. Listen, for example, to what Emmanuel Macron has repeatedly said. I'll give you one quote from October 2019, where he said, the European Union does not work well with 27 members, so how to explain to anyone that it would work better with 28, 29, 30 or 32 members? Offering membership to every neighbor country is bizarre. Quote end. In April 2018, he already had said something similar in a speech to the European Union Parliament. He said, I don't want the Balkans getting closer to Turkey or Russia, but I also don't want a Europe that is already doing poorly with 28 or 27 members and decides to gallop away to have 30 or 32 or even more with the same rules. In May 2018, here in Sofia at the European Union Western Balkan Summit, he said, what we have seen over the past 15 years is a path that has weakened Europe every time when we thought about enlargement. Our Chancellor, German Chancellor Scholz, speaks a little differently, but then you look closely, he says the same. Scholz has given a couple of interviews where he says, we need to take the Western Balkans and all the candidates in as soon as possible. And then comes the but, that when you look closely is a no. Because Scholz said, but before we have to reform the European Union, we have to get rid of the principle of unanimity voting. But of course, Scholz knows that Poland, for example, or Hungary, or some other countries would never agree to that. I mean, I'm not an expert on Poland, but from everyone I've talked to, they tell me if they had to choose between taking the Ukraine in, which they would very much like to, but giving up their voting rights, they would, of course, say, no, then Ukraine should stay out. We want to keep our, not voting rights, our veto rights, and sorry. So, these are the two remarks I wanted to make for the beginning, thus having lifted up your spirit, I hope. It takes for ages and there's no movement anymore, 2127, July being the earliest possible date if we continue at the current pace. And then people saying, that important people saying in Berlin and Paris, and the arguments will not go away, I guess, when the people go away, that actually we can't do this because we have to reform the European Union, which in itself seems impossible now. Just as a food for thought, you might, of course, disagree with me completely. That's fine. I would love to start with a question concerning Moldova, because Moldova is the freshest, next to Ukraine, the freshest European Union candidate. I remember I was in Moldova when the application came, and an advisor of Maia Sandu, when we discussed this issue, said, yeah, of course we know it's not realistic right now, but we were under pressure. We are the pro-European movement of Moldova. We cannot say, well, Georgia and Ukraine are applying, we are just staying aside. Could you maybe describe a little bit what's the state of play, what are the expectations as far as Moldova's candidate status and the further process is concerned?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for invitation and for this occasion to explain what happens in Moldova. I think first, nobody in Moldovan government expected to get the candidate status last year. The plan was that we consciously do our homework, and years, some in the future, 2, 3, 4 years, we come with application. Obviously, the war changed with logic because it opened the window of opportunity. Wars open windows of opportunity. When you can fast forward and do things which cannot happen during peacetime. This is why Moldova decided to apply. I will push a bit back on what you've said, that we haven't seen anything exceptional with Ukraine and Moldova as a candidate states. There was an exceptional process since the application, questionnaire filled by governments, and the decision to grant the candidate was unprecedented speed. Yeah, it never happened before. 3 or 4 months. I think this gives a reason to hope that maybe in this case, in Moldova's case, there will be further unprecedented steps. Well, the expectations again in Chisinau is to do homework this year. There are conditionalities, those 9 conditions which European Commission put forward. There is a roadmap to implement them. Partially, if you ask me, the governmental reshuffle in Chisinau, partially is response into the maybe slow pace of implementation of a roadmap. So maybe there is attempt to speed up reforms. Expectation is to have first verbal assessment by EU Commission in spring, a written one in autumn. Ambitious goal is to start the accession talks this year, which I think is very ambitious. I think Moldovan government sets the high bar. And I would say it's 50-50 for Chisinau to open accession talks. If not by the end of this year, maybe early next year. And if it happens, it will be a second exception. Because I think Montenegro waited for 2 years, and I think someone else in Western Balkans waited for 2 years from the candidate status in order to open later accession talks. What is important for Moldova is that candidate status mobilizes bureaucratic machine. What you can see now happening in Chisinau, ministries are hiring people. They're expanding the European integration departments, yeah? Because the workload is much bigger. They need to act fast. So we see the expansion of bureaucratic machine. Second thing, there was interesting opinion polls where Moldovans were asked whether they support accession, and I think 63%, it was International Republican Institute opinion poll, they said 63% support accession to EU, which I think candidacy gave an additional boost for societal support. But then Moldovans were asked how long it will take to become a member, you know. And I think there is a good dose of realism, because some of them were saying 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Nobody said that it will happen immediately or next year. Yeah? So there is a kind of medium to long-term horizon when common Moldovans think that it will happen. Whether it will happen or not, obviously it will depend on the consensus which will emerge in Brussels. But I think on the Moldovan side is that we try to worry about what depends on us. Yeah? We have to do what we can do, and then if again stars align together with the homework done, maybe it will happen. But you know, the last point would be, I mean, on societal level, Moldovans are already part of EU. Yeah? Many of them migrated to European Union. Many of them already have European passports, and it's pretty significant number. What is interesting to observe, because of war, we see increasing migration of Moldovans who previously have been working in Russia towards Europe. Yeah? So the numbers of Moldovans leaving Russia for economic reasons, for security reasons, you can be conscripted forcefully and sent to the front line, even if you don't have a Russian passport. And we have plenty of occasions with Central Asian migrants. They're increasingly migrating to Europe. So on the societal level, I think Moldovans are becoming even more part of EU. What is needed to formalize it, institutionalize on the...
Well, many of them are anyway, because they have Romanian passports, no?
Yes. I would say 700,000 probably have Romanian passports as well, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, but I'll leave that for a second round. Dubravka, should we maybe speak about Serbia a little bit? The only country, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, where a majority is not in favor of joining the European Union anymore, thanks to very intensive PR work by your government. What's the state of play there? Do you think this could be, this anti-European Union public opinion could be turned around again? And basically, what is the, I mean, I must say, I understand the cynicism to a certain extent, because, well, because of what I've just said. Nothing is happening for so many years.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. And I'm surprised that you changed the question there, because I wanted to say something about the question.
Of course, ignore my questions, of course.
No, because in communist times in Yugoslavia, when you didn't know how to answer politically correct, in the politically correct way, then you'll say, I don't agree with the question. So I don't agree with this question coming from Serbia, because the last public survey shows that only about 30% is pro-European integrations, and which is even worse, 51% is against. And which is even worse, a year before, in December 21, it was exactly vice versa. So it was 51% pro and 30% against. So what happened? Of course, it's the war in Ukraine. It's huge Russian propaganda. Serbia is the only country that didn't introduce sanctions to Russia and to Putin regime. Russia today is functioning from Serbia. But for me, this is a superficial answer. if we dig a bit deeper, then there is obviously the answer, Kosovo. So for decades now, so it's not only Vučić. This is something that was before Vučić. There was a huge propaganda that Russia is protecting Kosovo and that Kosovo will never enter into UN thanks to the Russian veto. But today, counting on Russian support international relations, it's rather strange. So it seems that we have to dig even deeper. And in the explanation of this panel, it says that Europe is a value-based economic and political community. And I think this is the reason why we have only 30%. Because if we analyze Serbian political, economic, and social elite, then we can easily understand that it's not in their interest to be part of political, economic, and especially value system. Because if we have Vučić's authoritarian regime, he has absolutely no interest to join a democratic bloc. It's directly against his political interest, against his absolute power, against his control of media, against his faked elections, destruction of institutions, etc., etc.
You have somehow, I dare to disagree about the economic elites. I think they have an interest in joining the European Union.
No,
okay.
That's completely wrong. They do have interest to get European money, but they are getting European money without European control.
Well, if you talk to Marko Čarić, the director of the Chamber of Commerce, he would love to join better today than tomorrow. But we can leave this maybe for afterwards. But you already partly answered a question that I wanted to ask. But maybe we can dig a little deeper. Alexander Vučić officially and his government still say that membership in the European Union is our main foreign policy goal. At the same time, the media that are most heavily supporting Vučić domestically, Happy TV, Pink TV, Informa newspaper, are bashing the European Union day by day, and this has had an effect over 10 years on the public opinion. In the times of Boris Tadić, his media were not doing that. Do you think this has also contributed, and if so, to what extent, to the gradual shift of public opinion? Because it hasn't always been that way.
Of course it did. Of course it did. But then the question is, why are they doing this? Because I have some percentages here. So the European Union is 60% of total trade partner of Serbia. 63% of investments come from European Union and nothing from Russia. But still, the propaganda is that strong. So is it crazy? Is it totally irrational? So what I'm trying to say here is that it's fully rational. This is their deepest interest, but to take the money from the European Union without the control.
But the money that you get as an accession candidate cannot be compared to the money that you get when you're a member. I mean, it's much, much more.
But on the other hand, we are getting some of Russian money, Chinese money, Turkish money, Saudi Arabia money, again, without any control. And for the corrupted society, political, economic, and social elite, this is much more important than to get the controlled money from Brussels.
Iryna, your country is furthest away from any European perspective, at least as long as the current dictator is running it. Can you elaborate a little bit about the public sentiments towards the European Union there and the general state of affairs there in Belarus?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I was really surprised when Karl-Henrik approached me with the question whether I would join this panel, because my immediate response was, I disagree with the question. No, I really didn't know how I would fit and Belarus would fit in this discussion, because clearly in any near or midterm or even 100 years future, Belarus as a state has no chance to join the EU. Nevertheless, Belarus and Belarusians are extremely European. I mean, not extremely, but we feel, and this is very emotional. It's nothing rational. It's not about numbers, but we feel European geographically, historically, mentally, culturally. We were at crossroads, and still we know that for those who are inside of the country, European Union remains a dream. For those who are inside of the country, the sky is closed. So there is an iron curtain around Belarus, which, despite being dictatorship for quite a long time, still was pretty open. So Belarusians traveled extensively until 2020, including to Europe. But now it's an iron shield. The sky over Belarus is still closed, and I know that many of you might not be aware of it because Belarus faded away from the news except for its role in Ukrainian war, the role of the state, not of the people. But nevertheless, now from Minsk you can't fly anywhere but to Russia, Georgia, and a couple of flights to Turkey. That's it. The land borders are also closing up, literally with the fences, and we understand why. But still, it doesn't help Belarusians inside of the country. Inside of the country, it turns into a prison. And it's literal. More than 30,000 people went through prisons or remain in prison in Belarus for participating in the protests in 2020. We have, as for yesterday, 1,455 political prisoners, and these are the numbers that were recorded, and of course there are many more who are unknown. Just in 2022, more than 1,200 people were convicted on politically motivated criminal charges for events affiliated or triggered by the protests in 2020. They're still tracking down people for what they were doing in 2020 and keep arresting. So it's really, the country is not yet a concentration camp, but it's a countrywide prison. So for people inside of Belarus, as I said, Europe remains a dream. There was a survey, and I should say that there is no polling or independent or any kind of objective sociology in Belarus, but the survey made online and urban population only showed in August 2020, that only 5% of Belarusians today have Schengen visas. Only 5%. 17% say they would try to apply. The rest doesn't even dream of that. Nevertheless, having said so, Belarusians in general have a positive attitude towards Western lifestyle. That's how the question was formulated. So I'm not quite sure what that means, but I will try to elaborate on this a little bit. So 48% with this positive attitude, 48% have never been in EU countries. So they've never seen Europe, and they still have positive attitude towards Western lifestyle, and 70% among those who visited Europe. Russia, and Belarusians are rational, I think, is perceived as a country with the greatest political influence in Belarus, no surprise. But Western countries attract Belarusians with their high standards of living, expected, and democratic values. What's interesting is that Belarusians more often positively assess the influence of the West than Russia on their legal consciousness, tastes, and attitudes toward learning. I found it pretty amazing of what those people who are not traveling to EU actually see in EU. But then I'm running a magazine which is really focusing on people, on human stories. So behind the numbers, any number to me is a real person. It's a coincidence, but in August 2020, we ran a story asking several young Minskers, people who live in Minsk, who are 25, under 30, who have never been to Europe, asking them, what do you think of Europe? What's your image of Europe? I will just give one quote, because I think it's really telling the story. Artyom, 25 years old. I've never been to Europe. I don't have a very clear idea of it. I've heard that people in Europe are smiling and friendly, but this sounds more like a fairy tale to me. There is a myth that in Europe everyone lives carefree and happy, and once you are there, everything will work out by itself. I don't think it's the case. no matter where you live, if you want to succeed, you have to work hard. I would really like to visit Europe and see it with my own eyes. In Europe, there is a different attitude towards a person. There is actual, not formal democracy. That is, collective decision-making about the most important processes in the society is at the core. I really want to live in his Europe. There are also more opportunities for self-realization. It's related to democracy to me. I sincerely believe that European states support all undertakings of citizens and legal entities and do not hinder them. In the end, it is beneficial to all. Unfortunately, I don't see it in Belarus. Here, I have a feeling that nobody except for my family cares about me. It's so great when you see support in the face of the state, not an obstacle. So it's really a dream. But on the other side, more than, we don't know the exact number, but the estimate that about 250,000 Belarusians left the country since August 2022 because of the repressions and then because of the war in Ukraine. It's a big chunk of people. So in some way, very similar to Moldova, Belarusians on feet literally joined Europe. There was a survey in October 2020 of those who left the country, and it showed that Belarusian diaspora, this new diaspora, is young, under 40, is well-educated, 70% with higher education, and quite well-off. So people are having well-paid jobs. But Europe for them became not just a dream, but reality. And reality is sometimes also complicated. It's very hard to fit in. It's hard to legalize yourself there. But nevertheless, as for now, and some of these people left almost 2 years ago, some of these people left like a few months ago, over 40% said that they want to come back to Belarus. 35% said that it's hard for them to answer this question, but they inclined that they would rather come back. We, of course, understand the longer they stay in European countries, and the main destinations for immigration are, of course, Poland and Lithuania and Georgia, because you don't need a visa, and then many transfer from there to Europe. So this is the kind of a reality that Belarus is divided now between Belarusians inside of the country, Belarusians outside of the country. What we try collectively as democratic forces, independent media, we try to be glue, because the government does everything to disconnect people, disunite people. What we try to do, we build networks, we build structures, including for Belarus being present and visible in European Union with some kind of representation. And I think this is something for the future.
Thank you very much. I wrote down 4 or 5 follow-up questions, but I will come back to them in the second round. Now, we have been speaking about a country that is about to start, or hopes to be about to start negotiations, about a country that is having negotiations for almost 10 years, about a country that unfortunately is far from even dreaming of beginning negotiations. And we have also one representative of one country here that is already member of the European Union since 2007. Vessela and I have discussed the issue very often and at length. So I would also, in a second round, ask you on your further thinking of this. But I would like to start with a question that you might disagree with the way I put it, and you're of course free to disagree. Some people say that, well, if the credibility of the European Union enlargement process needed a last nail in the coffin, then Bulgaria drove it in by vetoing the start of accession talks with North Macedonia after the country had done more than any other country in the history of enlargement, meaning even changing the name of its state. You're free to disagree, obviously. Could you a little bit explain how it came to that position and where we are right now?
I think I don't disagree, no. But maybe we can start maybe 2 steps earlier. It's actually amazing that Karl-Henrik succeeds to fill a room on a Sunday morning on the topic of enlargement in Sofia. Because this used to be a very hot topic many years ago, and it somehow lost its attraction. And it has been gradually losing its attraction as a topic. And this is partly the answer to also Michael's question. Because I think the sheer idea, the very idea of European enlargement has become a sort of a political tool, sometimes to distract from other things, sometimes just to prove whatever national sovereignty means to some and so on. But my 2 steps back, looking at 2007 and before that, I was listening to an interview by Ivan Kostov, who was the Prime Minister of Bulgaria 1997 to 2001, and his government was actually the one who filed the application and started the negotiations with the EU. And he said that back then the main driving force for us to apply was actually about the rules and the rights. And I think this is one element that we don't talk about that much anymore. It was really about how to manage this system change in a kind of more orderly manner. Whether that succeeded or not, I think is a secondary question. But I think this is a big difference to the Western Balkans later on, who really started talking about enlargement more and more in terms of access to funds. Because it seemed like, as you were also mentioning, it seemed like the other things were not that interested about anymore. We're not interested that much in the rules, and we're not that much interested in the rights. And now with Moldova and Ukraine, I think that there is a third set of reasons, and these are mainly security reasons, right? The EU has become a security actor. The EU has become much more of a geopolitical thinker in a way this was not the case even a couple of years ago. I remember 2014, we were in Belgrade for a conference. I think Tim Judah was there as well. It was right after the Russian invasion of Donetsk, Lugansk, and then of Crimea, and we were having a panel again on enlargement. And I thought that the 2014 events are going to make countries like Serbia to be pressed to decide, to take sides, not to be able to sit on the fence anymore. And for the EU, it would be a wake-up call to say, look, you cannot pick and choose, right? European integration is not something where you take what, pleases you and leave the rest. But I was wrong. I mean, none of that happened. It took many, many years, only for this moment now, for the EU to kind of turn around and say, there are geopolitical reasons why we have to make choices, and we cannot let it go like that. 2 things to that. This is why I think, Michael, you're usually right about things, but I think you're not right about the fact that nothing has happened on the enlargement front. A lot of things have happened in the last couple of months.
True.
It is obviously on the Moldovan and Ukrainian side a big new avenue. I think they will start negotiating much sooner than we believe. And then the question is, what will happen to the Western Balkans?
Yeah, of course, you're right. I was being too apodictic. Also, Kosovo finally received visa liberalization, at least a date for it, which is a big plus for the credibility of the European Union. It should have happened long before. But so yes, I take this back. Nothing has happened. Something has happened. I still dare to be skeptical whether in a year from now we will still be saying that, but we can discuss this later. But may I ask once again, I think I may, it's not a secret, everyone knows it, who follows Bulgaria. You were a foreign policy advisor of the former Prime Minister Kirill Petkov. So I would like to come back once more to the issue of North Macedonia. had it not been for Bulgaria, North Macedonia would be negotiating now. Now, of course, when you negotiate 105 years, it doesn't really make a difference when you start, I would say. But still, theoretically, they could have started. Can you explain a little bit how we got to the impasse
I was getting there, maybe slower than I should have, so I apologize. Macedonia has applied has a candidate status since 2005. Now we're 2023, and when you look at it in its, this very fact, I think, is scandalous. The fact that we have left Macedonia out in limbo for so many years. 2019. I think Bulgaria was domestically in a kind of the beginning of the decline of the GERB cycle. It was a coalition government together with the Nationalist Party, with the so-called Patriotic Bloc, and there was clearly the idea that this is not going to last for much too long. I think there was also the rumor of Magnitsky 1 going around. And this is when that government decided to create this whole idea of a veto. It went through the parliament, it went through the Council of Ministers. I have to say that this veto came a year after the French had done the same thing, again with North Macedonia. It was still, for people who have been following the whole enlargement debate, quite puzzling, because it was Bulgaria in 2017-18 who had become the advocate for the Western Balkans and for the enlargement. People in this room probably remember the Bulgarian presidency of the EU. This was the biggest topic. And so this turnaround in 2019, I think we all met with a mixture of disbelief and probably a bit of a attempt to diminish it, to say, look, this is not going to hold. It's impossible that it holds. And then it became clear that this was really seriously meant, and that it was basically the glue that this coalition that was keeping this coalition together in many ways. And when I took the job in December 2021, I knew that this would probably be the single biggest foreign policy issue Petkov's government will have to deal with. Of course, 2 months later, the war started and everything became even more complicated. His own coalition was a very difficult one, in which 2 of the coalition partners actually did not share his opinion that this issue was an impediment for Bulgaria and had to be resolved. But at the end of the day, there was a decision of the parliament that basically stipulated the lifting of the veto on the condition that North Macedonia includes in its constitution the Bulgarians. This will hopefully happen soon. And I hope really that North Macedonia will start negotiating very intensively after that. But the fact is that this kind of sovereignist urges are not rare in the Balkans. Somebody was saying to me the other day, what will happen next if, for example, Serbia and Croatia start doing this, and so on and so on. I mean, you can come up with many of those horror scenarios in which in which this sovereignist urge produces big problems for the enlargement.
This, I think, is the big danger of making historical issues a prerequisite for European Union membership, because if we start this in the Balkans, we have it as it is, but then we have a total impasse. Croatia could block Serbia because of Jasenovac or Vukovar, and Bosnia, and everyone could block everyone because of unresolved. Well, we have a historian here who can explain this much better to us than I could. But I would like to open the second round, and then I guess we can open to the audience with another question concerning Moldova. Before the war, I met again this advisor of Mrs. Sandu that I mentioned before, of the president of Moldova, and he opened my eyes to something that I think from afar is easily to overlook. So, what is the promise of Maya Sandu? She said, "We are going to reform the justice system. We will make Moldova a just country." Okay, that is a great plan, and who could be against that? But what was not so clear to me, because of the huge brain drain that also Iryna has mentioned, and the brain drain that all the countries we're talking about have been experiencing, there is a sheer question of who is going to do it. He told me, I asked him, well, okay, many Moldovans are overachievers in the West. They work today at the World Bank, at the World Food Program, whatever, at successful. Why don't you get them back? And he said, well, it's not that easy because, some bought a house in London, they have a mortgage to pay, they cannot come back to work for the official salary in Moldova because they just cannot meet their ends. Others have, settled in wherever in West, and their children go to school there. It's a hard time for us to get people. And then he made up, I don't know the figures by heart, of course, but he made up this calculation. We have, I don't know, correct me, 600 prosecutors and 400 judges and 200 deputy prosecutors and judges, and if we want to make sure that they haven't taken any money, and if we want to go after that, we don't only have to screen them, but also their wives and parents and children and brothers and sisters. And this is a couple of thousand of cases. We just don't have the people who do that. We are out of manpower. And I saw that, even it goes up to the highest echelons of Mrs. Gavrilica and Mrs. Sandu for not finding good assistance and so on. So he was being very clear, this is also a question of people. We don't have enough about them. Where do we stand there? And this was before the war, which of course made the situation even worse. Where do we stand there? From these simple points of questions, who does it?
Good question. I will start with Moldovan diaspora. I think during the last elections, 2021, Moldovan diaspora based in Europe accounted between 10-13% of all voters, who massively vote for pro-European, pro-reform parties. So to a certain extent, and I think if you look at the figures how diaspora of Georgia votes abroad, you will not see the same amount of participation. So, to a certain extent, Moldovan diaspora is connected to the country. They go and vote, and they try to shape the political consensus and political will in Moldova. There is a contribution of Moldova diaspora to form a strong political will back in Chisinau to make reforms, which is rare in the region in itself. If you look at the current majority in the government, the last time when the government was formed by a single party happened in 2020, in early 20s, in 2000s in Moldova. Second element, there were cases when this government managed to attract people from diaspora to come back home and to take important positions. You've mentioned about very successful people who probably will not abandon their comfortable life. But if you look at the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he did this choice, and he went for the third time, to serve in the government. You have a new anti-corruption prosecutor who moved from United States to Moldova to head this very difficult office and to assume a difficult task. The question whether they form the critical mass or not, can we speed up the return of Moldovans who are probably already in the second generation? In case of the prosecutor, it's her parents who migrated, when she was a kid. And she's the second generation Moldovan who was brought in the United States. Whether we can attract more Moldovans from Europe and from the United States to come home. Third element, I think you are right to point out to this dilemma. There is a strong political will, and there is not enough administrative capacity to follow through on the ambitious agenda which Moldovan government set. There can be some various solutions. I mean, EU detaching some officials, seconding officials.
Which is happening.
Which is happening, yeah, in great numbers. Second element would be through international donors, probably to create reform units inside each ministry in order to attract young and bright Moldovans from abroad. So they will get a bit better salary and they will have a perspective, but also maybe to give them a feeling that what they do matters, yeah? That what they actually do transforms the country. And I think would be for me the last element is how to maintain this societal consensus behind the government. So administrative capacity is important, but how not to lose the political consensus which drives country into the right direction. Yeah? So we have to keep in perspective both an administrative capacity, but also society which elects people who would like to continue reforms.
Which brings me directly to another question that I didn't plan to ask, but now listening to you. When the war began, next day I flew to Bucharest, and then via Iași I came to Chisinau, and okay, then I went on to Ukraine, but I also spent some weeks in Chisinau before and after. And you know, what do you do in the evening in the hotel? You watch TV. I don't understand Romanian, Moldovan. I do understand Russian, so I watch the Russian language channels. And a conversation with a Moldovan journalist, I'm not going to name now because I don't know whether I have permission, opened my eyes for a different thing. He said, you know, you from the European Union, you have these great programs, you're funding investigative research, you're doing, you know, and then you get a couple of thousand viewers and you can concentrate on one story. And they do the same in the Western Balkans. You have these elite projects. But what the Russians are doing is so much more effective. They don't fund investigative journalism. They buy a television station, which is full of crap, pop music, cheap game shows, 95%, and then 5% propaganda, which is just trickling down, and no one is going to change the channel for these 5-minute news. And so he said it's very effective, and of course Telegram channels and all this stuff. He said what we would need in order to counter that public perception and the support for the government, this is the problem. I mean, it's great that you have these elite programs for elite stories that then 0.05% of the population read, but the Russians are doing what really the masses are. And why don't we, he basically said, why don't we do pro-European propaganda the same way? We have a channel with cheap entertainment and 5% pro-European propaganda. Now, I realize I don't imagine how you decide in Brussels, okay, this is what we're going to do, a cheap European Union channel. But can we, I mean, is this, it seems to be he described the problem very well.
Look, I think EU played a critical role in 2017 until 2020, when it protected several independent channels, which gave opportunity for opposition to reach out to people. And then it translated into the result of elections partially. So there was an attempt at that time by government to evict one TV channel from the studio which we were renting. There were attempts to take the license of another one. Yeah? And EU stepped in through, not directly, through direct funding and helping to restart those TV channels. So EU played an important role and still plays an important role. Now that nobody tries to close these channels. Second element, because of war, political shows and Russian news have been suspended from Moldovan TV cable. So you cannot now watch Russian news and TV shows. The question for Moldovan market is that it's still dominated by oligarchs. The question is how to de-oligarchize the media market and how to attract European investors from the media market to Moldova. It's a small market. Financially, it's not attractive. There are many times when Moldovans were inviting Europeans to come and invest. be it TV channel, radio, newspaper, the response was, it's too small. We are not interested.
When you combine Romania and Moldova, or is this not an option? Because Romania should be a more attractive market and the language is the same.
Yes, but there are certain peculiarities between media market in Romania and in Moldova. What I can see, this war is changing the media landscape in terms of how much you read about what happens in Ukraine now. And it's not only in Russian language, but Moldovans read a lot of news now translated from Ukraine about what Russia does. And we slowly change this perspective, yeah? I remember, I think, even Maidan, 2014, there were not that many news in Moldovan media space when now about the war in Ukraine. And I think the last point would be that despite intensive propaganda Europe discovered it 7 or 8 years ago. Russian propaganda in Moldova is present since early 90s. Yeah? You open the public channel, Russian channel, and despite the sustained propaganda, Moldovan population overwhelmingly voted for someone who promised European way of life. European services and European prosperity and European Union.
Even though,
despite the propaganda.
Yeah, we should be mentioning, according to the polls I've seen, she wouldn't get the 51% now anymore that she got.
Well, usually after first or second year of the mandate, this is the trajectory. For me, it's more important what will happen in the next 1 or 2 years, if they will be able to rebound.
Of course. Iryna, you were reading out to us the statement of Artyom, who was explaining his view of Europe. Belarus is the only countries of those that we speak about where I've never been to, and I really have to admit I don't know it well. I don't know it at all. How strong is the Russian propaganda in Belarus? And how many, you were saying for many young people or people in Belarus, European Union is a dream. Is Russia the nightmare then? And how close are we to this nightmare becoming true? I mean, you keep reading news of, Putin plans to swallow Belarus this day, that date, whatever. Then others say, no, the constellation right now is better for him. I don't dare to make any judgment. I would just like to know more.
Well, it is quite a complex picture. It's very hard to draw it in just a few lines. But, well, one thing to know is that besides and before Russian propaganda, we had our own state propaganda and Lukashenko propaganda. Of course, Belarus was largely hooked in Russian infospace and never departed from it, especially through TV. There were sometimes clashes between Lukashenko's propaganda and Kremlin's propaganda, and that was usually very interesting for us to observe and analyze. What we definitely see is that the opinions of people and their worldview very much depends on what type of media they consume. An important thing to understand about Belarus is that for years before 2020, the Lukashenko's government was investing in developing very good infrastructure for IT sector, which means that internet was and is available to almost anyone and high speed. And this is what the independent media took as an opportunity just from the very start, from the very early of 2000s. And it means that independent media were able to become the important source, not only of information, but of these cultural lenses. So basically, even though despite the fact that hundreds and thousands of websites were blocked, mine included, but Belarusians are also tech savvy and know how to circumvent, not only to access websites, but also because of the social media. So the social media platforms are not blocked in Belarus. Some, of course, the other way to cut the information flow is to label them extremists. The independent media and groups, what it means that if you are a user and you put a like to a post under a media outlet which is now called extremist, 2 years ago, it's criminal liability today. So if you share a post, if you just send it to your friend, you are arrested and you will get a prison term. So, I mean, the discouragement level is huge. But at the same time, people do consume independent media through social networks, especially, well, we are kind of navigating it like if Telegram played a huge role in 2020, but it's very toxic now for people living inside of the country because this is what the government monitors first of all. There are many ways, I can talk for hours about that. But so Belarusians quickly thought, okay, if Telegram is toxic and very, very dangerous for me, then I will switch to TikTok. Like YouTube, surprisingly, it was like eye-opening for me because we always thought of YouTube being a platform for younger audiences because all the audiences we thought were watching TV. It's not the case. The audience, the main audience of political independent YouTube bloggers and shows and news people of 55 plus and 70. So I mean, it's a very complex thing, and of course, Russian propaganda. Now Lukashenko's propaganda basically repeats whatever Russian Kremlin propaganda says, so it's magnifying it. But people consume in different ways, and since 2020, despite repressions, despite editors and journalists being sentenced for 18 years in prison for treason. Despite all of that, not a single independent media stopped publishing. We had to relocate. We now broadcast from abroad mostly. We still have people on the ground. But it just means that you have to fight back. And sometimes with very limited resources, you can actually create quite a serious pushback.
But how many people follow the state media and the state propaganda? Are there any studies or any estimations?
Well, there are estimations, but it's very, very blur field. It's very hard to measure, actually. It depends, who you ask, how you ask, in what manner you ask. I can just say that it's easier for me to assess the audiences from the independent media point of view. I just see that, well, of course, there is urban population is mainly online. So TV just doesn't matter, they don't watch. Rural population still more hooked, especially older one, to TV. And then it shows in the results of the opinion surveys, especially on the war and what people believe is what's happening in the war. The same as in Moldova, independent media in Belarus cover Ukrainian war from Ukrainian sources extensively. And sometimes we even get feedback from the audience saying, well, Belarusians inside of Belarus are a bit frustrated, saying, what about us? Whole coverage is about Ukraine. So it's that people are kind of a little bit missing themselves in it. At the same time, there is also fatigue of negative agenda because all the news are bad. It's inside of the country. It's bad. Your life is bad. The war is bad. There is nothing good. So we see this trajectory of audiences searching for some sense of normality, because your life continues no matter what happens. So there is the need for this diversified content and different niche media, and audiences are finding them. But of course, the media is extremely important factor of what's happening inside of Belarus and with people's minds.
Thank you. Dubravka, you have already mentioned Kosovo. Some people say it's the biggest stumbling block for Serbia on the way to the European Union. In brackets, I don't believe that, but we're not here to discuss my views. There has been an initiative lately of France and Germany and the European Union to solve the issue. You have for sure followed this debate. Do you think there's any chance of success for this initiative to succeed and to remove the stumbling block, and for Serbia actually to have some progress on its way to the European Union? Is this a realistic approach?
Well, we'll see. Tomorrow they're meeting in Brussels, Vučić and the Kosovo leader. So there are some signs that something will happen there, but I'm living all my life with those signs and nothing happened. So let's not believe this. But if we follow the official Vučić media, you will never think that anything will change, just as you said before. So how can we imagine European integrations? How can we imagine finally the solution of Kosovo issue if Vučić media is so anti-European, Kosovo pro-Russian, etc., etc. So I just can't imagine that. So Vučić is about to decide, and I agree, but still European Union is letting him playing this very, very dangerous game, and he's still on a very nationalistic platform, and he's playing on this platform, and you heard what my friend Senad said about the situation in Bosnia, about the situation in Montenegro. So Serbia is destabilizing the region, and this is how Serbia is attracting EU, not only funds, but
But you said the European Union is letting Vučić doing what he does. What do you think should the European Union do instead?
Well, they were not only protecting Vučić, they were supporting Vučić for 10 years. They knew that all the elections were fake. They knew that he's killing media, that he's prosecuting opposition, that there is a crazy Russian propaganda. They let him do it. Merkel let him do it and gave him enormous amounts of money in order to support his regime. That's the famous stabilocracy.
So you think had Merkel, I agree with you on Merkel, but you think had she not done this, he would have not been in the place where he is today?
Well, I can't say that. I can't answer to that question, but he will not be that strong as he was, because Merkel met him once a month. She called him practically every day. They were very close friends. And in each dangerous situation, especially before the elections, there was Merkel coming there.
Well, or he was received in Berlin, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or he was received in Berlin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was that politics of stabilocracy in Albania, in Serbia, the open Balkans, and everything. I mean, this is...
Aside from this and that concrete initiative, like the newest one of Germany and France and the European Union, on a broader picture, what is the way to coexistence between Serbia and Kosovo? And is the idea that was brought up the first time in 2007, even before independence of Kosovo, I think, or maybe right after, by Wolfgang Ischinger, the former director of the Munich Security Conference, may be a way to go, who said, why don't we take, there are differences, but why don't we take the German model, saying we agree to disagree, we will not ask Serbia to formally recognize Kosovo, but we will ask for them to go ahead while not recognizing. Some people say, well, this is a wrong comparison. You could do this if it was between Albania and Kosovo, then it would be more close to the German example. But now, as a basic idea, do you think this is the concept that one day, maybe with different leaders in Pristina and Belgrade, could be the way towards a solution, or is this not a practical approach?
I think it's the best approach in this moment, and we launched the petition in order to support this initiative, but we also have the problem that 5 EU member states didn't recognize Kosovo. And this is something Vučić is playing on. So we have Spain, we have Romania, we have Greece, we have Slovakia. Cyprus. So, of course, they can always say, why should we recognize Kosovo if you have 5 member states that are not recognized?
Cyprus even goes further. They say, Cyprus says, we would not recognize Kosovo even if Serbia does. That's at least what they used to say. So
this is a wonderful position for Vučić. Why should he do it?
Which is what he keeps saying. Yes, exactly. Vessela, I'm a very democratic moderator, so I would give you 2 questions and you decide which one to answer. Can we do this? So one thing because we don't have so much time, one thing is, should we concentrate maybe on North Macedonia, on the historical commission, on the question that we have the 5th election within 2 years, so we don't even know who gets the say? What is the way out, and is there any, let's say, realistic hope that we can get out of this stalemate anytime soon? Or should we maybe talk about an issue that we, both of us, have discussed last time here in Sofia, considering that Germany and France have more or less said they want no enlargement, at least in its current form, and that we know there is not going to be a reform. There are alternative ideas, actually, to what could be done. And the most attractive idea, or most prominent idea, is, okay, why don't we let them join the common economic zone? Because then the argument of Macron would be out of the way. It would mean you're a full member. You wouldn't even notice that you are not in the European Union. You are, for a citizen, it's no difference whether you live in Hamburg or Belgrade. Economically, you're just the same. Just you wouldn't have your own commissioner, you wouldn't have voting rights, and you wouldn't take part in the European elections. What should we talk about? You can also talk about both, of course.
I'm no expert in the historical commission, so
But your husband is.
I would defer to others. But I think on the German-French duo on enlargement, we have to be fair that for the first time, this duo, although it's not working greatly in other areas of EU integration, this duo has been working quite efficiently on a number of Western Balkan issues. Germany and France were extremely helpful last year around creating the compromise on lifting the veto from the Sofia perspective. But also they're now extremely, I think, helpful to Lajčák in trying to get both Vučić and Kurti not only at the same table, but also on the same page, more or less. Apparently, their offer to Vučić has been very clear for the first time, that there could be, that he could really bear losses on if he would not be constructive. But to your question about having the Balkans join the internal market as an alternative, look, if you look from the perspective of Ukraine and Moldova, this is not what they're after. They're not. What they want is the political membership, because it's the political membership that gives them the real security guarantees that they need. And this is why I think the real future for enlargement will be a mix of, as my Polish colleague Piotr Burasz calls it, partnership for enlargement, meaning a political agreement that all those countries can participate in the debates in the European Council, but would not have the voting rights, and some sort of a sectoral integration for those of them which are prepared and ready to do that. This is not an easy thing to navigate. It's fairly complicated, but it will take us away from the whole chapter opening and closing focus, because I think this is the crux of the matter. What we need to realize, and I think Dubravka also expressed it very well, is that the democracy deficiencies of the Western Balkan countries are actually the impediment for them to advance. And this is why the political approach, I think, to enlargement serves both the new Eastern candidates and the Western Balkan societies in an equal way, whereby you would say, look, it is about foreign policy alignment, it's about, democratic standards, it's about media freedom, it's about rule of law, and this is what has been holding back the Western Balkans for such a long time.
Thank you. Now, Karl-Henrik has given me this sign, and I'm wondering, is it 2 minutes? Is it victory? Is it what? Sorry? Okay, 20 minutes for an open question round, and Dubravka was accusing me of having socialist tactics by changing the question. I'm being socialist again now. The collective is always smarter than the individual, so I'm expecting great questions from you. Misha.
Thank you. Addressing the title, I know it was meant as a joke, but as somebody who had his European citizenship stripped from him, driven by a venal coalition of pro-Russian billionaires, of American and British hedge funds, of billionaire media owners who don't even live in the United Kingdom, it's a rather bad joke. And I like the way that Michal turned around the question, because it addresses, and incidentally, the leaving the European Union. I fortunately have Irish citizenship as well, but my wife and my children don't. And the obstacles that this places in front of individuals, if they want to engage with Europe, are considerable. It is punitive financially, it is punitive socially, culturally, and politically. And so I would say it's axiomatic that a lot of people want to join the European Union. But as I say, Michal's question goes to the heart of the matter. I highly recommend an article published yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, which is co-authored by Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt, about ChatGPT and generative pre-trained technology in general. It is the best article on ChatGPT that I've read so far, and I've read a lot. It is also, like many of the other articles, very, very frightening. But what it demonstrates is that we are moving into an entirely different world, and the European Union has to grow up and start acting as a geopolitical player on the same level as the United States and China. Absorbing the Western Balkans is as close to falling off a log as you can get in geopolitical terms. And it's an absolute disgrace that Macron to this day is still making statements like that, encouraging the Bulgarians, in my opinion. I mean, they got the idea from Macron in the first place. We really need to be focusing on not maintaining an idea of countries like France from the early 1960s and to think that we can preserve some past glories. We need to be looking at the future, and in order to do that, we've got to absorb the Western Balkans. I'm afraid that although Moldova and Ukraine have every right to apply for membership, if you don't get the Western Balkans in, having waited since 2003 for this membership, then you're going to create more problems down south. But obviously, the war with the Ukraine, the Russian war with Ukraine, is the opportunity where the EU has to grow up and start acting in concert with the economic power, which for the moment it can still wield. But if it comes under control of American and Chinese technology, which is what is already happening, then we are screwed.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments there? I saw a gentleman here in the first row. Okay, go there first and then second here.
Well, I would like to hear your comment about one thing. And this is the fact that not being member of the European Union is actually now, as we see, a security threat, and a very serious security threat. And then having in mind three big elephants that are walking in this room from the very first day. And those are the populism in case of Macron, for example, the nationalism in case of, I give an example of nationalistic tensions between Bulgaria and Macedonia that are leading to blocking the membership accession of Macedonia. And then the corruption, which is the main export of Russia into all these non-EU members, but also in EU members, and we are not talking about that too. And also there are many measures that are not taken up by EU, especially tackling corruption and enabling all these free shore zones, non-regulation of cryptocurrency trade, etc., etc. So we have three big obstacles, and we have a huge security threat. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can take one more comment or question, then you could answer the question and have your final statements in the last round. Oh, sorry. Okay, so 2 questions. This one and the gentleman here, and then I guess we have to stop. Yes.
It's me first.
Oh, hey, Angel.
Okay, no, that was a question. But if it's okay, it will be me first. Okay, so while I do agree that Serbia and other Western Balkan countries, domestic impediments do pose obstacles to accession, I still think that the EU has a bigger responsibility, seeing the bigger picture, holding the bigger picture in its hands. It sees how the pieces of the puzzle work. And I remember that back in 2018, when Bulgaria was held the EU presidency and had this Western Balkans angle, there was a very simple narrative. So we bring back the Western Balkans into focus, and we also work, that I don't think it was stated like this, but it was de facto like this. We also work to achieve one success story. And this success story was Greece and North Macedonia. It ended up being like that. I think in this respect, the big problem with Bulgaria's veto on North Macedonia is not that, Bulgaria made a big mistake. It was not a different mistake to what France did with regard to accession and what Greece did with regard to accession. Both blocked North Macedonia too. But the problem was that it managed to make it seem as though this one success story of enlargement had been killed. Reading Western Balkan press, I'm under the impression that many vast parts of Western Balkan societies do need one success story to move on. Do you think that if the EU and the US, which now seem to be acting in concert on issues like the Kosovo deal, just pull themselves together and focus on one success story, be it seeing North Macedonia begin talks successfully and finally, or solving the Kosovo issue or whatever. Just if they focus on one thing, it could help kickstart the accession process again. Because right now the EU's approach looks a bit like Bulgaria's domestic policy. Everything is in shambles, so you always say everything is bad, we cannot fix any of the sectors because we have all of them in ruins. So if we take one case and just harness all of our diplomatic and political efforts to achieve a result, don't you think this will work for the overall process?
Thank you. And one last question or comment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this fantastic panel, which Michael and everyone has really opened our eyes up to problems and distant solutions in a wonderful way. And it would be marvelous if this could be written up in a more sophisticated form. But Balkans, don't worry. Don't believe Misha. There is life after Brexit. It's not quite that bad. The EU is not the only show in town. There is NATO, which seems to have done quite well. Even though Britain isn't in the EU, I seem to have noticed that it has given a certain amount of help to the Ukraine, which has been recognized. We have a very good Minister of War, Ben Wallace, who is playing his part. We're giving a lot of money to Ukraine, even though we're not in the EU, amazingly. But my question is very, very simple. When Brexit happened, Habermas made the point, we've got to create a kind of European public space. We've got to work on that. As well as on one of the biggest obstacles to a European consciousness was raised by a friend from Belarus Communication. If I want to read The Guardian, it's okay. If I want to read The FUTS, which has very good articles, I'm up against a paywall. If I want to read The NZZ, which has some very interesting articles about Ukraine, I'm up against a paywall. It really wouldn't cost the EU very much to fund a kind of global newspaper on the net or in YouTube, which was regularly putting out a kind of broadsheet every day. Maybe there is one and I haven't found it yet. but I still think that this would be one of the most helpful things that we could do. We've torn down the wall, but we've kept the paywall.
Thank you. As a journalist, I'm not sure whether I would like to be funded by the European Union, but we can discuss this in a separate panel maybe. These were very different sets of questions, so I would just encourage you to answer in any way you like. You have a lot of notes. Maybe there's something that you really find is important and you haven't been able to mention. Why don't we keep the order we had before? So start with Moldova, then Belarus, Serbia and Bulgaria.
Let me address this question about EU membership and security threats for democracy. I think this is a fundamental question for Moldova, because what you can observe now on the Moldovan political scene is the clash between dirty party finances and clean party finances. Yeah? The governing party, which accumulated money through grassroots support and fundraising, and a certain set of actors which are using or re-injecting the Moldovan politics money which they have stolen from the citizens and getting money from the Russian state companies on the Russian state. And I think for Moldovan democracy, it's an issue to which extent EU can help to address external malign activities. For instance, sanctioning Moldovan oligarchs, some of them living in European Union, and still can move money around and inject them in Moldovan politics. But for Moldova, it's even more. It's not only surviving as a democratic state internally, it's also surviving as a democratic state shielded from external threat. Yeah? Last spring, it was not a theoretical scenario when Russia would move tanks and simply replace government in Moldova, which was democratically elected. Yeah? From this perspective, I think what important to highlight is that EU membership and EU candidate status and EU membership is not only the thing of prosperity, economic development for Moldova. It's an issue of security. Statehood, existence of a Moldovan statehood, but also survival of fragile democracy inside Moldova. And then I think I will address something about EU needs to grow up. I think it's happening. The question is how fast and how sustainable it is. Yeah? And just to give you one example, again, if I go back to Moldova. Before this war, EU has not provided military assistance to Moldova. Yeah? I think 2 months before the war, it was a decision to provide 7 million euros for 3 years for non-lethal logistical things for Moldovan army. Yeah? War started, or the second war between Russia has started, and this budget is increased to 47 million, which basically is the entire Moldovan defense budget. Yeah? So it's unprecedented in terms of volume, but also for peppers EU allocated money. It was not only about this time about logistics, non-lethal military support. Yeah? And probably this year it will be even bigger sum of money. Then if I look at how EU deals with security issues internally as well, EU before in Eastern neighborhood was an actor, was addressing hybrid threats. Now EU is a player addressing conventional military threats. For the first time, EU is the actor which shapes military balance in the Black Sea region. It never been a military actor who would shape military balance in the region before. My question would be how sustainable it is. The entire debate in Brussels, where to get money to sustain weapons deliveries to Ukraine, not this year, but years to come. Yeah? How to organize EU intervention force, probably for future crises. How to organize internally cyber defense, and many other issues. So war precipitated the debate, compelled the EU to do things which EU didn't do before, but is EU able to switch from the crisis mode, from reactive mode now, into something more sustainable and proactive and shaping the agenda, and in the Eastern neighborhood, but also in other parts of the world?
Thank you. That's exactly what remains to be seen. Iryna.
The debate here is focused on another part of Europe, and that's very just and fair. And I think we would all like to see a success story to be inspired and encouraged about the future. I'll just mention a few things that for Belarus, Europe is an existential choice, because it's either we remain in the orbit of Europe and part of it, or we will be swallowed by Russia and are likely to lose not only our sovereignty, but also identity, not only Belarusian, but European identity, which is still very strong in the country. I also want to touch upon a little bit on the role of diasporas of different times, because it popped up yesterday and today as well, that until 2020, the Belarusian diaspora in Europe was basically invisible. Belarusians were easily assimilated in their new countries. But in August 2020 and the follow-up months, we suddenly realized that we had the Belarus outside of Belarus, which was very vocal, created a lot of solidarity and unity and visibility. That was a great thing that happened, I think, to us, to Belarus as a nation. What is happening now is that diasporas are again less visible, but what they're doing is crucial, because they're actually sharing the experience and knowledge of Europe that they have throughout their lives and helping to build the structures for the future, to build the bridges. So I think this is also very important, that that's not only brain drain, it's also the knowledge, experience, and networking and structuring, imagining the future of a free Belarus.
It's up to Serbia now too.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm not representing Serbia, obviously.
I know.
Obviously,
Well,
0.1%.
The other Serbia, the other
Serbia. Well, I do agree with Misha, and I do agree that we should think about the future, and future is dangerous in the Western Balkans, and I do agree that there is a huge responsibility of EU, because they left that black hole in the middle of Europe. And we were talking and writing that this is extremely dangerous, because it opens the doors to Russian, Turkish, and all the other propaganda. And so now to come back to the first question, why is Russian propaganda that successful in Serbia? So it's not only because Serbia elite is not that interested in EU integrations, it's because the war never finished. So Serbian elites, and not only in Serbia, in Bosnia, in Montenegro, in Kosovo, of course, they called it the frozen war. And they were openly saying they're expecting the world order to change in order to finish the war.
Which is why they supported Trump, for example.
Exactly. So they said it openly, and they're saying this for 20 years, and no one wanted to hear that. And now the world order changed, and they really saw it as a wonderful opportunity, not only to revenge NATO, but also to revenge all the neighbors, because you have to understand that Serbia lost 4 wars in the 90s, and that there is extreme frustration because of that. So it all played a huge role in this Vučić-Putin propaganda, due to EU who didn't understand, that didn't want to understand, and we explained that to ambassadors for some time. But then they said, well, there is that fatigue, this is extremely expensive. I said, what? But you're pouring money anyway. So this is expensive, and it's going to be much more expensive. So it's urgent for the Western Balkans to be integrated.
I'll be very quick because I think we ran out of Karl Hendrik's 20 minutes. But to the Habermas issue after Brexit, I think the European political community idea is one such an attempt to create a space whereby we can discuss future architecture of Europe on in a larger format. The UK have been extremely interested in participating, and I think this is the first initiative where I really see colleagues also from the FCO and from other institutions coming very, very eagerly and trying to make it work. By the way, the next big summit of the European Political Community is going to be in Chisinau on the 1st of June. So this will hopefully also make other non-EU member countries really part of this debate. On the issue of corruption as Russian tool, I totally agree. This was a largely an underestimated channel and issue for many, many years. I hope that we now know much better. And I think the EU is now getting geared up to working on this. There are various instruments that one could mention here. To me, politically, the biggest kind of trigger will be, or maybe the biggest goal post will be the European elections next year, because especially after the Qatargate, the European Parliament is very much up in arms on the corruption issue. And third countries' influence over European affairs, the political families in Europe will have to tackle this. It's across the board. So I think this will be one big question mark, how they're going to handle this issue. And to Angel's question or comment on the success, I think the first success will be if the meeting tomorrow on Serbia-Kosovo goes well, because if we have a preliminary agreement which would stipulate that Serbia will not block Kosovo from applying to the EU, applying for NATO, and now as first step applying to the Council of Europe, but also for Kosovo in giving autonomy to the Serbs and others in the north. This is going to be, I think, a big, let's say, the beginning of a big success story. I'm trying not to be overly optimistic because I have worked on the Balkans for too long. But clearly, the start of serious negotiations or a faster pace of negotiations for North Macedonia this year is going to be also a second big deliverable. So keeping fingers crossed.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to summarize this discussion, it's impossible. But to end on a positive note, keep in mind that what I said in the beginning, if we continue negotiations at the current pace, already in 105 years, the first country can join the European Union, which would be the front runner, Montenegro. None of us will live to see it, none of our children will live to see it, but our grandchildren, if they adhere to a healthy lifestyle, might. And I think that's something to look forward. Thank you very much for coming out on a Sunday morning for such a dry, partly dry and difficult issue. Thank you.